Welcome and thank you for joining us this evening for our second town hall meeting. This pandemic has exposed so many inequities in our society and in sports. The reckoning our country is experiencing after the killing of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor has brought to light the systems of oppression that exist within society, and it has prompted us to take a closer look at our beloved sport. We acknowledge it exists in our society and in our sport. What are we going to do about it? We know that we must do better, and we have moved quickly to ensure we are doing better, and that is one of the reasons the task force was formed. One example of the quick changes are the changes we have made to our code of conduct by including a no zero tolerance. We've also included identifiers in the membership registration because we want to know who's in our membership. It is important to us to know that. And another quick change is the creation of a designated DEI fund to help with initiatives we will present. I want to take this time to also thank the board of directors for the support of the creation of this task force and for their presence as participants today. Before I introduce the members of the task force on this call today, I want to share with you all why I have raised my hand to co-chair this task force. I have been incredibly lucky to be raised in the City of Commerce with access to water safety and free access to teams. That program gave me the ability to thrive, and a big part of that was I always felt welcomed, and there was always role models that looked like me that I could look up to on my club team. The majority of my team identifies as Latinx, and that was so important in my development and my confidence in this sport. I want to help ensure all our members feel included and welcome to our sport. And I know that that is part of the reason why all of these all-stars agreed to be on this task force when John and I asked them to join our team. John and I were very intentional in creating this all-star team. We wanted to make sure our membership was represented. We wanted all of our stakeholders represented. We have administrators, coaches, parents, referees, players, Olympians. We also wanted to make sure there was geographical representation and diversity. Not all our task force members could make it today, but on the call today, we have Clark Witherspoon, former club coach, DEI practitioner, Mai Lei, I think you can't see her on screen, but Parent USA administrator, George Abel, parent, our legal counsel that has been so great. Felix, college coach from Florida, but is now at Brown University. Mariko Rooks, who is a water polo player at Yale and also bringing her researcher skills to the task force. Angela Uno, teacher, referee from Texas. Ted Minnis, Harvard water polo coach. Scott Newberger, parent, DEI facilitator from Arizona. Did I miss anybody? Okay, team, got it. Yes. Today, we will give you an overview of our objectives and update on our progress. John will go into more detail shortly. Lastly, and most importantly, we wanted to give you the opportunity to ask questions, give feedback, and we wanted to hold space to listen to our membership. So now I'll turn it over to John.
Thanks, Brenda. Again, appreciate everybody being on here tonight and appreciate Brenda's leadership for us here as well. She requires no introduction, but and I appreciate the fact that as we have discussed these things over the years, Brenda and I have been so invested in this part of our sport that we've been given the opportunity to take it to the next level and really try to be more aggressive and push forward a lot of things we've been discussing. And there's no way to do that without the larger community. And so having all of you participate in these town hall meetings is a big part of that. And also having the leadership of everybody on the task force. I can't overstate what Brenda said. It's not hyperbole. This is an all-star team of people that every time we have a task force meeting, we leave humbled and inspired by their work and what they do on a daily basis. It's you're going to hear a lot from them. I'm going to be brief because I want you to hear from the task force members that are here, but also be able to answer any questions that you have. So again, everybody here, attendees, please use the Q&A. And as we may be able to answer your question in the next 5-10 minutes as we present some of this information, but you may have lingering questions we'd love to answer and engage in those discussions as we go. So humbled and honored to be able to participate in this and do it. And as you see on your screen now, This representative group, with not everybody here tonight, but it's a group that has been meeting regularly since about August and has moved forward some of those initiatives that Brenda spoke of. I'll be brief about what we're doing, but I also want to empower you to engage in the work with us, because this is not certainly not going to be a top-down approach. Our number one goal out of this, while it is called the Racial Equity and Reform Task Force, our number one goal is inclusion and equity, right? Becomes before that diversity. The diversity is a byproduct of the work of being inclusive in our sport. And I think we have some work to do to make sure that we are being as inclusive as we can in our sport moving forward here. As we talk about the context of what we're trying to do here, objectives for tonight, we'll discuss, like we said, we'll discuss the goals, we'll share some context, we'll answer questions from the community, but understand why this started. So a lot of people on the task force, a lot of people who are attendees tonight, you've been engaged in this work your whole life. You've been involved in water polo your whole life, and maybe you've been working towards social justice and equity in water polo your whole life too, and we appreciate that, and that's not there. What has happened in the last 9 months here in this country and around the world has obviously helped accelerate and put us in this position to discuss it. So the context, discuss it at a greater level. The context we're talking about is this historical lack of access to aquatic sports, and particularly the historical lack of access to pools for people of color and low income. And that is very easy, I'll say this more than once, for us to reverse engineer why water polo at this moment in time is a homogeneous sport, right? From a racial standpoint. It's very easy to look back and see the history of exclusion, the history of segregation, and the byproduct of Jim Crow and the post-Civil Rights Act movement, that post-Civil Rights Act behavior of a lot of cities and public entities that have also led to this, that we can discuss further. There continues to be this lack of representation, and that's something that we can do about it. U.S. Water Polo has two missions, and this is where the Equity Task Force comes in. We have a mission of winning medals at the international level, but we also have a mission of growing the sport. And at the root of growing the sport needs to be a greater emphasis on this access to our sport. While we are doing this, the USOPC and essentially every other governing body of Olympic sport is going through a similar movement. So I'm happy and honored to also be part of the USOPC Council on Racial and Social Justice. Another co-worker and great friend and ally of ours, our Director of Marketing, Nancy Atifunwa, is also serving with this council, and we are gaining and gleaning a lot of information from other NGBs who are going through their same processes as well. It is not a secret that almost every non-traditional sport in America is subject to the same lack of access and representation that water polo is. Essentially, all non-traditional sports are dealing with this, and so there's going to be some collective ways to attack this issue with other sports and other people around us. And so understand that that's also where we're coming from, and that water polo is not unique, but it is unique in the sense of pools. It is unique in the sense of that, in the next slide, as we talk about this, that 55% of Americans do not know how to swim. And again, if we can reverse engineer why the current data says that 55% of Americans can't swim, it has a lot to do with the segregation and the lack of access to aquatic facilities that I just mentioned before. And in those dark countries that you see on the slide here above, one of the groups that we've partnered with is the International Water Safety Foundation. We've worked with them on a couple of fundraisers already, and have created some good partnerships with them. Those countries that are highlighted as dark, as you can see on the slide, drowning is a leading cause of death amongst people ages 1 through 14 in those countries, and the United States and North America generally is one of those. And so when we talk about this inability to access the pool, when we talk about the inability to access the beach through pre-Jim Crow, through the 60s, through the 70s, and we still see the after effects of it today, where people of color do not have public pools or do not have access to public pools in their areas, and why places like Commerce are such an anomaly and such an exception to the rule as opposed to the norm that we see. A place like the Chicago Parks Districts, Hialeah in Florida, these places where public facilities have taken on water polo and have highly successful water polo programs are the exception and not the norm. And the end result of the lack of access to these facilities isn't just that we don't get representation in water polo. The end result is that we have a water safety issue in our country, and we have a water safety issue around the world because of this lack of access. So at the root of this is the the issue of learning how to swim and getting access to water, which disproportionately affects people of color. And what we want to affect change in, and where we want to positively affect this this disproportionality and how we can get to it. So understand these statistics and understand where we're coming from. This is not just about water polo, but when people ask us, why isn't water polo growing faster? Or why can't we grow water polo quicker? Just remember that 55% of Americans already don't even have the opportunity to play our sport because they're not water safe and they can't swim. That's a tough place to begin with, right? And so at the core of this is how can we make people more water safe, comfortable in the water, and by the byproduct of making aquatics a more accessible place for everybody, our sport will become more diverse by that. And when we talk about equity, I want to be clear what we talk about equity, because some of the critics of movements like these will say, well, if you're asking for equality, I'm, Brenda and John, I'm not interested in quotas. Does that mean you guys are going to give people of color an automatic spot on the national team? Are you going to be doing this quote or that? It's not what we're looking for. What we're looking for is equity, right? When we try to talk about equity and we talk about leveling the playing field, this is what this picture is describing, right? We're not asking to say that just that everyone's going to be given a fair shake. What we're talking about is making sure that everybody has the ability to go forward, right? And everybody has that same ability. So if you need 1 box, 2 box, 3 boxes, those 3 boxes are going to be needed to make sure that you can see the game in front of you, right? And be treated in an equitable manner as we go forward. And so understand that equity and inclusion are the #1 goals of what we want to accomplish here. Furthermore, within this task force of people that we have assembled, and again, I'm so proud of this group, and you're going to hear from them in a second as they describe what I have here on the screen, is we've split up into subgroups. So the way that we've divided our work plan for going forward, and just the nature of any task force is not one that is going to last forever. The task force is going to work for about 12 to 18 months altogether. And then within that 12 to 18 months, we're going to be integrating this into the work of USA Water Polo and into the work of the community. And so chronologically speaking, as you see on the slide now, this is the division of labor and the work within the subgroup that's happening. So we wanted to tackle our policies and procedures right away. And Brenda mentioned our zero tolerance policy and the work to enforce that zero tolerance policy. How do you enforce one of the zero tolerance policy for discrimination? You can't just have it on paper. There has to be a way to educate folks about it and also enforce it. And we are working on a process for that right now that includes an ombudsman so that this becomes a restorative justice mechanism. It becomes a teachable moment for our young people as we work through that, and we can discuss that more in detail. And I'm hoping Scott, George, and those will discuss that as I introduce you. 2, we have an education and training subgroup where we are working towards training and education for our board of directors, our staff, our athletes, our coaches, our referees. Everybody will have an opportunity to receive education and training in this manner so that we're all prepared for this, right? We'd love to avoid issues. This is not about just dealing with discriminatory issues. It's about being prepared and teaching before we get to those points. We have a wonderful research group. You're going to hear from Mariko about that here soon. She is leading this. Mariko is at Yale University, playing water polo at Yale University from Southern California, and is the author of some work that you may have already seen that has been very, very descriptive about racism in aquatics. And she has partnered with our coaches on the panel, Coach Minnis and Coach Mercado, and have accessed their athletes at Harvard and Brown to work, current water polo athletes at Harvard and Brown and Yale that are working under the coaches and Mariko to work towards this research plan that we have so we can build some data up. It's not enough for me or anyone to say that commerce is an anomaly and every city in America should have water polo in their Parks and Rec department without having proper data to back that up, without having a professional academic case study to give. And that's some of the things that the research group is working on to make that happen. We have a partnership group, someone who's not on the call tonight, Tamua and I, Olympian from 2012. She works with the Utah Jazz at the moment in partnerships there. She's going to help us with that. Some people we've partnered with already. I mentioned the International Water Safety Foundation, Diversity in Aquatics, USA Swimming, other NGBs. There's a pool project out of Philadelphia, building a museum for aquatics people of color and what they've accomplished. We have many partners that we'll be working with that will help us with this cause going forward. And the end result of all this, again, chronologically speaking, in the work is going to be the greater access for the sport, right? We will all have greater access, or we'll be able to provide greater access for the sport for everybody by all the work that we're doing. And so I'd love to have the task force members introduce themselves again, and talk about just briefly why they chose to accept the call, and then also discuss a little bit of what subgroup they're in and with the work they're doing. And so I would appreciate that very much. Mariko, let's start with you and where you're at with the research group, since I hyped that up so much. Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. And yes, thank you so much to John and Brenda and everyone who's been doing the work to put this task force together and to make sure that we're promoting equitable change within our sport. As mentioned, my name is Mariko Rooks. I use she, no pronouns, and I'm a current senior at Yale, where I'm also a joint master's in public health student. And so I say this just because a lot of our research is definitely centered in the health outcomes of access to swimming, access to aquatics, and access to water polo. Some of that is simply because when we look at the disparities in access, there end up being specific health outcomes associated with it, right? We've talked about sort of drowning and mortality. And so recognizing that using that particular approach in understanding and working with our data really gives us as a sport a good case for why our sport needs to expand and why our sport needs to expand equitably. Everyone knows how to run, not everyone knows how to swim, and that's an essential survival skill that is currently being denied to a number of marginalized communities. In terms of the actual research we're doing, we have a couple of different projects that we're hoping will shed some light on both what our sport looks like now and what we'd like to look at in the what we would like it to look like in the future. And so some of that involves just being able to design better data collection methods for us as a whole that are representative of people's identities and representative of people's communities. So as also John briefly mentioned, right, revamping everything from our membership renewal and registration to make sure that gender identity, sexuality, racial identity are incorporated in as inclusive a way as possible. So that way, one, that we have on our end or organizationally a better sense of who is already in the room and who we need to reach out to, and also to make sure that people feel 100% comfortable and represented when they join us or when they continue to partner with us. To also doing some targeted questionnaire and survey work, better addressing and figuring out the sites where we can do better and the sites where we're doing well, so that way we can amplify the sites where we're doing well and pay more attention to the specific aspects of our organization and the ways in which we relate to each other that can be done better. We're also working to reorganize and evaluate existing initiatives within USA Water Polo, and hopefully be able to, through examining the work that other folks are doing and our own data, produce some new things as well. And so that's what the research team is looking forward to this year. So please stay tuned. There will definitely be some things that we'll be asking of folks as members. If you're interested in contributing to the process and sharing your story, we really believe in the value of experience as expertise. So hopefully you will see that going forward. In terms of why I chose to join this task force in particular, I think this is a big part of it. Getting to be able to do this work at the national and potentially international level is incredibly exciting and very needed. And as someone who, identifies as BIPOC, it's been really wonderful to get to share in this community of folks that are seeking to make our sport better.
Thanks, Mariko. One of the biggest blessings of 2020 was getting to meet you and have you be part of this work that we're engaging in. Coach Minnis, we're happy to have the head coach of the Harvard men and women with us as well. We'd love to hear from you.
Well, first, thanks for having me. I really have enjoyed the work we've been able to do, and I echo what John said. I leave these meetings humbled and have learned something that is always great. I started playing water polo in 1984, which to me blows my mind that it's been that long. I don't know where the time went. But when I started playing water polo in Northern California, there were not a lot of people that looked like me that played the sport. And I love this sport, and I have been able to do a lot, and it's given me so much. And I think access to playing this sport is something I was lucky to get, because a friend of mine, his father played the game, and they took me across town to their backyard pool and taught me how to play water polo. And I was able to go to Menlo Atherton High School that had a water polo team and start playing as a freshman. But kids around my neighborhood, they don't swim, and they haven't swam competitively. And so I think that's access is the number one reason for me to help make our sport have more diversity and people that look like me. So I'm excited to continue this and to give back to the great sport of water polo that I have enjoyed for 30 plus years.
Yeah. Thanks, Coach Mercado. We'll stick with the Ivy League connection. We went Yale, Harvard, now Brown. Yeah.
Well, yes. Well, thank you so much, John, for having me, and thank you for my fellow task force members for making the last 3-4 months so much more enjoyable, considering everything that we're going through. And my story is a little bit different in the sport of water polo, and it's a little bit different why I chose to be on this task force, or why I accepted the call when Brenda and John called me. I think first and foremost, I think growing up in Florida, Miami, Florida, it wasn't, while there was, because of the Latin community there was a lot of people that looked like me. So playing water polo, when I started playing, I was fortunate to have teammates and friends of that somewhat looked like me, to kind of make me feel like it was normal. I didn't really realize how different it was until I got away from Miami. But I can tell you, also growing up the way I did, I'm one bad decision away from being a George Floyd. I mean, I grew up in an environment that it could have easily been my path if and I do. And again, this is where water polo comes in. Water polo was a big part of my life, and I think it helped. It saved me, right? So as I'm in this situation now where have a beautiful wife, 3 beautiful children, have an incredible job at an amazing university, and I know how important water polo was to me, and I know that it can be important to people that look like me as well if they're giving more of an opportunity. Not that we're going to be diverse in a year, but at least the opportunity to be there was an important thing. And then the other thing, and probably the more important thing, considering everything that happened early in the summer, is that the really close friends that I do have in this sport, it was crazy how it was, like the Omar Amers and the Janai Kerrs, guys I've known for over 20 years. And we've always shared stories of experiences that we've had on pool decks, right? And we've never really, we've laughed them off, or kind of like, oh, let's compare stories. But with the George Floyd situation, and maybe the pandemic had a lot to do with it, and we're stuck, we're angry. And I felt like, and we looked at USA Water Polo as an opportunity to say, hey, this is our sport is part of this country that's going through this, and our sport has the same issues if you really want to see them. And I mean, obviously, I think there's racism in every aspect of everything we do in this world to a degree, but I feel that the being oblivious to it is something that our sport, my perception is that suffered. And I feel like the task force and some of the things that they're doing is to educate people to see that not only are we trying to give more opportunities and be more diverse if we can, but also, obviously the main goal, help people learn how to a basic skill like swimming, so we have less drownings, but also the people that are currently in the sport that look different, think different, not just by what they look like on the inside, but on the outside, an opportunity to let them feel like they belong in the sport, and this can be a safe place that they can feel accepted. So I'm so excited, fired up, and I look forward to doing more, because I'm not going to change what I look like, and I'm not going to change loving the sport of water polo as much as I do. So I have to be part of the reason why we work together to make it better. So, yeah.
Thank you, Felix. And I'd be remiss to say, appreciate you sharing that much, that the logo behind Felix as well, I forgot to mention in the, when I was rattling off organizations that we partner with, that around the same time that the task force was formed, the Alliance for Diversity and Equity in Water Polo was also formed, and many of us had were part of that group as it got started, and that's another entity, another group within our sport that will continue to fight for this representation and for equity moving forward. And I want to give them a shout out as well for their work and for our partnership and our ability to collaborate and continue to work together as we work through all this time. So thanks again, Felix. Scott Newberger in Arizona is. If I had the chance to read your resume, I would, because it's incredibly impressive for everybody. But thank you for your time as well.
Well, thanks, John. I appreciate it, and I really feel it a privilege to be on this board and this opportunity to work with all of these wonderful people. And talking to my kids that play water polo, I talk about some of the different members of the board, and we have Olympians and college coaches and referees and water polo players, and then they look at me, and I've never played water polo, and they're like, "Why are you on that board, Dad?" But it's really something that's very near and dear to my heart. I have studied managing inclusion through Georgetown. I'm also an associate diversified coach through Coach Diversity, and my master's is related to change management for organizations. So I know how important it is and how important diversity and inclusion is and how it can really help an organization to be more effective. I'm a human resources advisor in my part-time job as a National Guardsman. And so I'm in charge of the diversity and inclusion initiative for our wing. So personally, this is something that I really believe in, and I understand and know how being an inclusive organization can really help people to thrive and to reach their potential and to really become very effective, not only in a sport, but in their life. But really, I think that the reason that I'm on this task force, some of the reasons are really more personal. I have experienced prejudice myself religiously. I'm a member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and I have experienced some racial prejudice as well. Having been in different parts of the world, but really the most important reason why I'm on this task force is because I have two sons that play water polo. I have a racially diverse family. My wife's Hawaiian. I have two stepchildren that are half Black, half Hawaiian. We adopted our youngest son, who is from Tonga. He's Tongan. And in playing water polo, my youngest son had an unfortunate experience of experiencing some racial prejudice and other forms of prejudice. And as my wife and I looked to see what we could do about it, and we just didn't know what the policy was, what we could do, how we could address it through USA Water Polo. So, I definitely wanted to make a difference. I wanted to do what I could so that he didn't experience it once again, but also that no other athletes experience it. And I just understand how important it is, not just in the sport of water polo, but it's important for youth that are developing and learning to be educated and understand the importance of inclusion and how to interact with other people appropriately. And so I feel it's a great privilege to be on such a great board like this and to really push this initiative forward, because I know that if we help our youth to understand how important inclusion is, that it will not only help them in the sport, but help them in their lives. And we can affect communities that way. So I appreciate this opportunity.
We appreciate you, Scott, and you alluded to things as we segue in our next member here. But one is that the personal experiences that we've all had can have brought us here and have motivated us as well. And this is deeply personal for all of us. While we are keeping it together here professionally and are going to work professionally, there's a lot of personal aspect to this as well for us, right? And so we appreciate that. And you also talk about understanding that as a parent and as a member and as someone who experienced discrimination within our sport, within a club, and in your area. How do we clarify our policies and procedures? And so you've been very helpful for that. Thank you, Scott. And George Abel, you've been incredibly helpful in that process as well. George is serving on our task force and is our legal counsel from Paul Hastings as well, and it's been just integral in helping us reform this zero tolerance policy and working towards our next step for enforcement, because we do want this to be crystal clear to everybody on what the policy is, how we enforce it, and what moves on. So George, thank you for your efforts, and would love to hear from you as well.
Sure, thanks, John. And like Scott, I've never played water polo either, so I kind of come to this task force as somewhat of an outsider in one way. My connection to the sport is through my daughter. She has played water polo since she was about 10 years old and is now playing in college. And the experience she's had has just made me so proud of USA Water Polo. The groups that she's been a part of have been tremendous. They've been, when she was 12 years old, there was no girls team in our local area. And so she was, not at her age group. She was able to play with some of the older girls, some of the boys teams. And so I was always just very thankful that USA Water Polo was willing to kind of go out of their way to include her into a team that would enable her to improve. And it has. It's done great things for her abilities in the sport, but also just generally as a person and in her growth and development generally. And so when asked if I would be interested in joining this task force, I was readily willing and able to join, and looked forward to working with this group. And it's just been a tremendous opportunity, and it's been an honor to work with this great group of people. I've seen so many talented and committed people, and I've seen great results come of that thus far. And I know there are going to be greater results to come in the next year. As John mentioned, my skill set generally lends itself towards the policies and procedures portion of the task force. I'm a lawyer by training. I've been working in the field of employment law for 30 years now. So I've seen lots of policies and procedures on handling discrimination and inclusion and diversity and equity. So I've got something to contribute there, I think, and I've been interested in helping out the task force put together a code of conduct that essentially sets forth the ground rules, and so everybody knows what the ground rules are and can operate from a level playing field. And as John and Brenda mentioned at the outset, it's really about an educational program, a training program. We wanted to make sure that people learn from what we do, and that was part of the creation of the zero tolerance policy and the code of conduct, and also establishing or revising the grievance policy and procedures that USA Water Polo has. The existing policies can be somewhat daunting and maybe inaccessible, some might find, and so we're working on trying to make them a little bit more accessible, make them a little bit less intimidating, so that folks can enforce the ground rules that we try to set out. And so that's been what I hope my contribution has been and will continue to be. And as I said, it's just been a tremendous group to work with. And like all the others, I look forward to our meetings and always come away from them thinking how great a group it is and how much they've been able to achieve. So thanks, John.
No, thank you, George. And we've also been blessed to have Angela Uno with us. Some of you may recognize her from officiating your games on the pool deck, but she is also our zone head referee in the Southwest zone in the great state of Texas, and is an educator by trade. So we're coming with a lot of angles for us to be helpful here, and been a big contributor. So Angela, would love to hear from you as well.
Hi, so yeah, like he said, I'm Angela Uno. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm proud Japanese American. I joined the task force because I'm really passionate about education and the power of education. And I want to be able to impact change in this sport by using education as a tool. And so part of what I've been doing on the task force is helping figure out a way to make the education and training aspect of the diversity task force more engaging and connect to people in a way that makes sense to them. So yeah, I'm excited for that to roll out soon and to get people on board.
Thanks, Angela. And I think it's good, important to know that, you know, the training we have for referees and for coaches can be integrated into our what we're currently doing right now. So while we have coach and referee education, this is a chance for us to integrate this type of equity and inclusion lens right into that training as we're working towards it. Coach Weatherspoon, former Coach Witherspoon, Mr. Weatherspoon, batting cleanup for us. Again, honored to have you with us. Love for you to share with the group as well.
Hi, everybody. Yes, I'm Clark Weatherspoon. I was a longtime coach at the Stanford Water Polo Foundation. And I joined the task force because I really love the sport of water polo, but also because I want to make, in partnership with others, the culture of the sport more open to more people. One of the things that I loved about being at Stanford is that the players, the families came from all over the world. You know, being able to talk with families who spoke many different languages, practiced many different religions, came from a lot of different backgrounds. It was a great learning opportunity as a coach. And I know that my players really valued that. And it made our experience of traveling and competing all the better. And then in my professional life, I'm a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant and educator. I'm a middle school principal in San Francisco, and yeah, this is really important to me. So this is a great group. I've learned a lot from this group and excited for the Q&A portion. I actually want to jump in, John. I'm looking at one of the questions. I want to jump in with an answer to a question because I'm part of the education task force. And one of the things we're working on, as was discussed, you know, referee training. We're working with staff of USA Water Polo. And also thinking about player training. And there's a question in the chat, which is, what can players do? You know, so players, I think if you're someone who is still playing the sport of water polo, one, I'm really jealous. It's been a long time since I've skillfully played the game. And I think maybe some people might cast doubt on whether or not I ever skillfully played the game, but that's another conversation. If you're still playing, I think one thing you can do in terms of supporting the task force is, you know, shoot us an email about what you'd like to learn about connecting with different types of players, right? So one of the things that I experienced, you know, and to kind of bring it back to Brenda's introduction, talking about the role of commerce in USA Water Polo, one of the things that I experienced was that players were always so curious about kids from commerce, right? Coming across a team full of kids who spoke Spanish, right? Coming across a group of kids who were racially unlike a lot of other teams that kids played. There was so much curiosity, right? So one question or something that could be useful to us is, as a player, share with us what you'd be interested in learning about how to connect with kids from other teams. That's one thing. Another thing I might recommend is that if you're a player, maybe share with us some of the challenges that you've had around competing against players from different backgrounds. You know, because sometimes you're in the game and, you know, maybe you're going into counterattack and someone, you know, like they hit you in the chops with an elbow, or you're guarding somebody, you're face to face, and, you know, your heart rate is so high and someone says something to you and you're like, wait, what did that person just say? You know, there's all these moments in water polo where we have to deal with difference. And so if you're an athlete, you know, those would be two things. Like, how have you dealt with challenging situations? Or maybe what are some of the skills you'd like to learn about dealing with challenging situations? And then what are some of the things you're interested in terms of learning about different types of players? And then last thing I would say is encourage your teammates. And this, I think, is one of the most important things. And it was the biggest thing for me as a water polo player. Encourage your teammates to be supportive of different types of players on your teams and the teams that you compete against. I mean, I can think about being on teams that were like racially and socioeconomically not super diverse, but the level of respect that I had for my teammates was so high. Like, my teammates treated me really well. I think that they cared about me. I know I cared about them. When we had problems as a team, people were super supportive. I think for you as a teammate, learning how to do that is not just about winning games, but it's about building community and learning how to do that outside the pool. So I'll use that as my intro.
Yeah, thank you, Clark, and would love to jump more into these questions as we go, and I think we're all going to touch more into what we can do on a local level, because I think that's important. And if it's not a question you're asking, I hope it's a question you're asking. What can I do with my team? What can I do with my university? What can I do with my school? Back home, as you get to look at our subgroups. So just a quick summary before we get in there. Some of the things that have happened so far, right, is zero tolerance policies. If you look into your code of conduct now, it's all one code of conduct for every member of USA Water Polo. You can see the zero tolerance policy. We've committed to the education and training with the great educators that you see here that will start contributing to creating those things. Mariko mentioned, and I think is an amazing thing for us, that now we have greater identification on our membership forms, that you're able to, and that's work is still not done yet. There's more work to be done there, but the first step forward of being able to identify yourself and better engage with the NGB and with us and be able to represent your full self on your form is something that we're really passionate about, and also be able to collect that data as it comes in. And then the last thing we'll say is, and thank you to the our USA Water Polo Board of Director members that are on this call right now for approving a designated fund that's specific to the diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts that we're making. So now, when you donate to anyone donates to US Water Polo, they have an option to designate their funds to this work, to this diversity, equity, and inclusion work, and that's a huge deal. And we were one of the first NGBs to do this. I think the first NGB to do this, and now many are asking how they can do the same. One of the things I think we're most proud of is, since we started that fund, is you can get a look at where some of the funds can go if you donate there, is that we have almost 40 unique brand new donors to the fund. I mean, people have never donated to US Water Polo before, and the first time they've ever donated to the organization is at the start of this fund, and the fund is only 2 months old, less than that, I think, even, right, 6 weeks old. And so it's clear that there is an appetite to be part of this movement and part of this change from our membership, and that gets us incredibly excited. And we've had, while almost 40 of those have been unique donors, we have over 70 people who have donated to the cause, and again, in a really short amount of time. And it doesn't have to be a lot of money, but and I'm not saying that this is a fundraising campaign. It's just the ability to say that I care about this issue and to support some of the work that we're doing. And that's been really important in terms of getting the training done, getting equipment and infrastructure out to communities as we need. We talk about what you guys can do as teams and groups, right? Partnering with your local organizations nearby you. Do they have infrastructure? Do they have polo in every pool? Is water polo present in every pool that we're talking about? And that's what we have this fund for, and very easy to find that DE&I fund as you donate there. So appreciate everybody who's donated. I want to say thank you to all the donors. I want to say thank you to everybody who has contributed to that, and all the board members for making that happen. As we start jumping into questions here, I'll read a few, and then I think, as Clark alluded to, I'll throw it out to the panel, the panelists, and to the task force to discuss. And so, a common question that's being asked is getting access to the pools, right? So how do we advocate for pool time, right? How do we advocate for pool time as needed? Because water time is a premium in any community, and I would clear, and even during COVID, I would say it's even more of a premium, right, for everyone. And like Brenda mentioned earlier, it's created more of this gap, right, an equitable gap in terms of finding pools. So, which one of you has wants to start with a good talk about how we can advocate for more pool time in their communities and how we can use this opportunity to advocate better there? Brenda?
There's one of the questions was around research or data, right? So I don't know if there was anything that came to mind to Mariko in terms of how do we creatively think about this, or how do we present it in a new way so that we're talking to boards, or it's not that we're competing with swimming, right? But we just want to be able to have enough access to the water. So I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's part of the work that we're doing now, right?
Yeah.
And so hopefully by the end of the sort of calendar year that we've been operating on, we'll have, you know, a solid resource guide that you can take with you to start doing that work. I think that some of the things that we're thinking about now, just sort of, and again, like this is ongoing work, so all of this I'm saying somewhat tentatively because we're in the middle of sort of this process. I think the first thing is to recognize the ability that we have to make various kinds of community partnerships, and that there are a number of different models by which this can go about. And so whether it's working directly with the city to talk about sort of what do pool rates look like and why is it useful, or why do we need to sort of think about you know, water polo as a health outcome, particularly with the emphasis on treading as opposed to just swimming, that makes it important, right? As well as, you know, team building skills, et cetera, but also going, okay, how can we potentially work with other community organizations when it comes specifically to equity in aquatics, and like when we're talking about sort of identity-based or racial equity, to be able to form partnerships that potentially either alleviate or provide different sources or models of funding and contribution to make these kinds of pool rates, right? So part of it is like, who are you bringing in? Who are you working with? And then for us at an organizational level, right, how can we support you in those endeavors and those efforts? So thinking about different kinds of regional and local grant modeling that we can use as a national organization, hopefully, to offset some of those costs, or to sort of work with you in developing local programming. So those are the kinds of things that we're thinking about right now. I think really, and what I'm seeing here, you know, I'm reading some of the questions, and it's that, you know, it's easier to get kids into swimming than it is to get them into water polo. Like it's easier to have more kids in swimming than you know, we have in water polo. And I think that also speaks to some of the work that we're doing here, is sort of how do we figure that out, and how do we leverage what makes water polo unique to encourage kids to potentially participate in both, right, or to build our numbers. And so those are the things that we're thinking about. And also, in answer to a separate question, right, some of this is looking at aquatics at a larger level, right? Some of this does involve being in partnership rather than in competition with everyone, because I know when there's limited pool time, it always feels like you're in competition with everyone else, so you can get your time and they can get your time, right? But going sort of what's the larger goal here, and doing that at the national, international level as well.
Yeah, and I think it's important to recognize, sorry, Brandon, just 1 second, is the diversity in aquatics group, I think, because I see that question out there. We have partnerships with groups that, you know, like USA Swimming. This is not a competitive thing with USA Swimming. We've had several great meetings with USA Swimming about this issue of Learn to Swim. We've had great meetings with the International Water Safety Foundation, with Diversity in Aquatics. I want to make it clear that we are in communication and partnership with all these kind of broader aquatics groups as well, Brenda. Yeah.
I was just going to add, because I saw a question about USAS, which is the United States Aquatics Sports, and it's an overarching organization that helps us internationally. And at my pool, there used to be a synchro team. So one summer we had a synchro swim water polo camp. So we were in partnership. And it was great, because for us, it was like, how do we get kids comfortable in the water? If they all learn how to egg beater, then they can pick what sport, right? It wasn't about them becoming water polo players. It was about them being able to have water access and to learn different sports, and then make a choice. They might not even stick to aquatics, but I think it's creating those creative camps where you can just get kids to the pool, and the more we work together, I think it'll help us all.
Yeah, and I'll add something to that, if you don't mind, John, about just because everyone's situation is different, and I don't think there's not going to be one way that's going to work for everyone. Like I'll take, and I know Teddy and I, up in the Northeast, we've been very creative. We're, you know, in most inner city communities, like there are YMCAs and Boys and Girls Clubs. I mean, that's just, you know, and the majority of them have pools. Like one of the things that we're doing up in the Northeast is, you know, in Providence, is we actually partner with our swim team at Brown. And we started a community service where, and USA Water Polo actually came up with a great way for us to kind of introduce water safety without, I don't know ultimately the thoughts behind it. I know obviously it was like to get more people to play water polo, but we're actually using splash ball as a way to say, hey, you don't have to, here's the noodle, here's a ball, here's a cage, while you're in the water, getting comfortable in the water. And that's been working for us. And it might not work for everyone. And because everyone's city and communities are a little bit different, the Boys and Girls Clubs, they're looking for programs for the kids that are signed up there that have to go there after school care. So this was a way for us to get in. And now we're actually, during the COVID, we've been approached by the YMCA in Providence to kind of start something new. So I think that, and Teddy, you can see if you're doing something similar, but I think every community is going to be a little bit different, but this is where you have to be creative. And for me, I'm like, splash ball is a great way to get into a pool to help people want to get comfortable in the water. Because when you're in a noodle, maybe some shallow water, and then before you know it, they're in the deep end, taking 5 or 6 strokes, passing the ball, and feeling very comfortable. That again allows them to feel like they won't be the next statistics of drowning.
Yeah, and that was certainly one of the thoughts behind it. And then I also want to answer another question in there very briefly too, and talk about the outreach to other sports and other NGBs. I would repeat something I said in the opening comments, that this is an NGB-wide movement, and there's a USAWP Council, that's the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee, that is working on this, that we're a part of, and that we are talking to other NGBs on a monthly basis, and there's working groups amongst this, that this is an issue in youth sports in America, of how to access non-traditional sports. And so when we say that the Commerce and the City programs, where you all are advocating for that full time in your communities, is not something that is unique just to us, right? When we want Parks and Recs departments to have a broad base of this, and Brenda, you can speak to this. Commerce water polo is what we know, but Commerce has a Parks and Rec athletics across the board in other sports, and that's because the city sponsors that, right? And so the more that we can partner with, as Mariko is saying, and have the data and the case studies and the research to back up our case to Parks and Recs departments and to cities to say that this type of sports programming across the board is going to have a positive effect on your city, the better. This becomes what we are facing in America today, and this is a whole other webinar we'll be talking about, is this crisis of youth sports in America becoming a privatized thing. And youth sports is now a private entity, as opposed to the public sectors that you all are asking your questions about in our chat and our Q&A, which we love, right? Because you're recognizing that this public partnership is what's going to help us create better access and help us grow the sport. So this is where we're at. Yeah.
In the town hall the other day, we talked about, the socioeconomic barriers to participation, and how that's a huge diversity, equity, and inclusion piece that for us as a sport we have to really think about. And something I think on the club level, for certain, we need to really be honest with ourselves about as an organization, is how do we facilitate kids and families getting to pools that are actually located in places that are inaccessible by buses, inaccessible by, in the Bay Area by BART. What do you do if the only place to play water polo, or the only place to see water polo, is 10 miles outside the city, 15 miles outside the city, and then 3 miles down a really windy road in a neighborhood that you've never been to? So as we think about connecting with youth athletes at the youngest possible ages, also being really strategic and collaborative around how clubs and high schools partner with groups to bring kids to their pool, right? When we force people to find their way to practice, to find their way to registration, it limits the number of people that are going to be so diligent and so focused, rather than going to find them and making the pathways smooth and open, and then being welcoming in a way that's going to have those kids say, you know what, this is where I belong, and I'm going to bring my friends.
Clark, that makes me,
yeah.
Sorry. No, it makes me think about, another reason why Commerce works, right? There's a bus system. if you live in any part of the city, you could get to the pool on a free bus. And I know that this can't exist anywhere else, but in 2008 there was this celebration, and the city kept saying homegrown heroes, and everyone's like, aren't all Olympians homegrown heroes? And I'm like, no, because most people don't play for their city. They go to another city to play where there's that competitive club team, or that club team that is, successful. So it's also, it makes me wonder, could we also have successful club teams that have resources go and partner with cities where maybe those kids don't have to travel, but we go to them? It's like, how do we decenter? How do we think outside of the box so that we could use the resources that already exist? So I'm throwing it out there. I don't know if it's feasible, but just things that it makes me think about.
I want to ask both of you a question that's not in the chat, but came up in our first town hall, right? Clark, you talked about some of the traditional ways of like forcing registration and finding the website and finding the club, right? I want to find water polo in my area. I have to Google water polo and then find the name of whatever the club is in the area, and those are barriers within itself, right, to find the sport. Can we speak a little bit about that cost? And you talked about the socioeconomic barrier to helping within clubs. A lot of clubs will say, well, we have scholarship programs, right? And the scholarship program allows us to help athletes come into our club. Speak to maybe how that can work, or some of the challenges that come with that.
Yeah, in the last town hall, this was kind of building on the ideas of Felix and Mariko. Like when we look at the avenues to join water polo, the main one is swimming, right? So Mariko spoke about this, right? Like it's easier to join a swim team because they can take more people and they have a wider range of participants, right? And then water polo is building on that foundation. And it often says, if you want to join us, you have to, like you said, you have to find us. You have to figure out a way to learn like the foundational skills, because a lot of water polo clubs don't have the time or the patience to teach someone the foundational skills of like the swimming, right? So maybe when you come, they'll teach you how to egg beater, but you got to know how to swim and swim pretty well, right? And then there's also this idea of socioeconomically, if you don't have the money, then we'll offer you a scholarship. But the scholarship opportunity in most clubs, one, is limited, right? We have a limited number of scholarships, and it shifts the burden of participation onto new athletes, which is actually a barrier, right? So
correct.
For a sport that is seeking new participants, trying to grow new talent, you want to limit, or you want to reduce barriers rather than put them up, right? So thinking about reorienting how we identify, train, recruit athletes, and then also how the practice of onboarding athletes in clubs also needs to be really looked at very closely. Like, what's the culture of bringing new kids in? How do we let those new kids get connected to other families? How do they experience tournaments? Is cost prohibitive? Like, are all your tournaments focused on driving somewhere far away or flying somewhere? If that's the case, what does that mean for an athlete who's got a scholarship, but is also still playing basketball or still involved in some other activity? We have to think, I think, really holistically about how to make access, long-term access, because we all know that it takes a long time to be good at water polo. Long-term access needs to be something that we think about, from advertisement to signups. Everything has to be structured in ways that are going to draw people in, as opposed to prevent people from showing up.
A few things. I know we are out of time, so I don't know if we want to, if we want to keep going, or I don't want to be mindful of everyone's time, but just a few things that came to mind when I hear Clark speak to this. And, my Mavericks water polo out of Menlo Park, it was never meant to be this competitive club to battle Stanford, to battle SoCal, right? It was meant to be a club where new members came, learned the sport, older members came to learn the sport. We don't have clubs that cater to beginner water polo players, right? There isn't a space for it. So that was the whole idea behind me starting this club in East Menlo Park. And like, there's great people like Clark that said, hey, Brenda, can I come and can I coach? So he came and joined a practice or two because he values that. But I was lucky to have, like, I started Project 2020 and that helped with the cost, right? It was like, there was another foundation that I partner with, Beyond Barriers Athletic Foundation, and they helped with programming. So there's all these partnerships that came together to keep the costs down. Like, families didn't have to worry about tournament fees. Families didn't have to worry about a swimsuit that cost $70, right? It was like, how do we eliminate all these additional things that we don't think about, or that we can, or what the help we do offer? It's here's a Schilde scholarship, right? Or something that is a one-time thing where we know our sport continues to ask for different fees here and there. So just, it's that club, we have morphed into something different because I want to have a bigger reach in how to help. And I know that a lot of it comes with cost, but I wish that more clubs would do that, or have just like a beginner feeder program and put good coaches there, because if you can teach kids the fundamentals from the get-go and give them great foundations, it's going to benefit you and your club.
No doubt. And I did, you're right, Brenda, that hour went by very fast. And because we do love talking about this, and you all are asking incredible questions, and I'd love to answer two more if we can, that are still outstanding with the group. And one is, I want to give a shout out to the Drake High School girls team that's on here right now. Their team is participating in this call. So thank you all for doing this. And they're asking, like, one of the questions that I think we're all asking, which is, what can we do as a group? What can we do as a team? What can we do locally, right, to engage in this work? And that is, there are so many answers to that question, and I'd love to be able to hit a couple of them, for the group. So if anybody has a good answer for them, because I know this is a question we all have. Anybody want to give the Drake girls an assignment? I know for a fact, and I'll give them credit for this, that they participated with what the Stanford women's water polo team did as a group, which was the Swim for Diversity campaign that maybe many of you saw, which was a direct way to fundraise into these organizations that we are talking about, like Diversity in Aquatics and others, to help with this work. And so I appreciate the work that the Stanford women did, college women did that day. Appreciate the work that places like Brown and Harvard and universities that are going to do local work that we're talking about. There are talks of broader national memberships to answer that question. MSOs, which is the short for multi-sport organizations, right? The ability to partner with MSOs and have water polo in all those places. This is something we've been working on for a long time. We'll continue to work towards, but appreciate that. Yeah, Teddy.
I know it was Felix made the point about the boys and girls clubs, and I know when I was coaching high school in Palo Alto, my team would go, which is Brenda's team now at Castellea, to Redwood City Boys and Girls Clubs, East Palo Alto, and we would do clinics on Saturdays and during the week on summers, and just kind of a splash ball kind of thing, where it was really just a lot of just having these kids have fun in the water with a ball. And the goal was to get them excited to go what morphed into Brenda's program. And kind of build that way. And I think that's the way it has to start, and through swim lessons. I think, if you can't swim, these kids aren't going to want to continue to play the game if they're not going to have some success at it. So I think you have to partner with swim teams, and add that the relationship with swim coaches has to be good. And I think that's an important piece, and something I learned when I got to the East Coast, and the swim coaches weren't afraid of me as a water polo coach. And to be able to do stuff with the Harvard women's swim team and the Harvard men's swim team with kids in the local area is something that is a great partnership, and something I think that will help grow our sport if we can partner a little bit more in that way too.
That's a good point.
I would also add that when you're starting off in this work, it's really easy to jump in. This is what I would do, jump in and do all this action, but also maybe pulling back to the basics and thinking about why you're doing this work, having the conversation with the rest of your teammates, because it fuels your passion. And when people see your passion, they jump on board with you. So before you jump into all this action and all the task force kind of work, I would pull back a little bit and have that conversation, that deep connection conversation with the rest of your teammates, and then maybe expand that circle out. And so you keep building these deep connections about this type of work, and then everybody's on board and it makes the work so much easier.
And in those conversations, right, asking yourself, who is in the room right now and also who isn't, because there are always ways in which we can make sure that folks whose voices aren't being heard are being incorporated and being centered in our conversation. So taking that step and looking internally first, because this is like a big saying in like the Black liberation movement, but like if your own house isn't in order, right, you can't go out and then attempt to do this kind of work. And that's like not a criticism, that's just like, right, a fact of the right. And everyone can do a better job of being more inclusive. Like this task force could it from low to high, right? There's always work that can be done in making sure that whoever's voice isn't in the room, bringing them into the conversation and doing so equitably and doing so fairly, and making sure also, right, if you're asking outside folks for help that aren't in your room, that you are compensating them as well. But just taking that look in, and it's okay, like being self-critical is good, it's beautiful, like it's an important part of this work. So doing that work too, to sort of echo what Angela's saying.
It's a really good point. Go ahead, Scott.
And maybe just to follow on with what Mariko and Angela were saying, I think, as you do look inward and you kind of learn a little bit more about yourself, then gives an opportunity to become more educated. And I think that's something critical when we're talking about inclusion. It's interesting that most of us have unconscious biases. Sometimes many of us unknowingly commit microaggressions. So just gaining an education and learning a little bit more about what inclusion is all about and how different people perceive things, it just goes a long way. So as we continue to develop, I think that helps us to be more skillful in being able to handle certain situations that might come up in relation to inclusion.
And just like, I know Gina coaches that Drake High School team, right? And I swam with them at Aquatic Park for Swim for Diversity. So happy to connect with you all again and see how we can brainstorm and put some things into play at your local high schools, like, are there other high schools that you can, kind of prompt into also doing some water safety, some swim lessons. So happy to connect. You know how to find me.
Yeah. And one other thing we talked about in our last town hall meeting, another way to make what this looks like, another great example of what this looks like, and I'll give the LA Premier Water Polo Club a shout out on this, is the task force. Some of the task force members discussed, partnering with local organizations in your community that are already engaged and interested in the work of DE&I, of equity and inclusion, right? There are groups in your area and your communities, national organizations, local organizations that are already doing this work. So connecting to those groups is great. And one way we saw this recently with LA Premier is they partnered with the Jack and Jill Foundation out of Washington, DC, which is a national foundation that it works towards mentoring young African-American boys and girls. And they had members within the club who serve on their local boards and committees for the Jack and Jill Foundation. Jack and Jill Foundation has nothing to do with water polo, but now using Clark's language of building a pathway to the pool for communities, right? Is that through the Jack and Jill Foundation and the young boys and girls who are participating and are part of that Jack and Jill Foundation, and the LA Premier Water Polo Club has created a pathway now for those athletes to be introduced to the sport. We did a Zoom for all those athletes. Ideally, that would have been a free clinic, right, in Harvard Westlake or in one of their local pools, to allow those athletes to come see a water polo demo, get coached by those high school athletes. It wasn't done by the club or high school coaches alone. It was engaging with the high school athletes themselves to participate in the clinic and introduce the sport. And now they're going to follow up and become mentors, aquatics mentors for these young boys and girls to give them that pathway to the pool. And so that's one way to do it. And there's 100 different ways to do that, but finding what works locally for you and partnering with those groups so that there is a pathway to get them into the sport and learn to swim and all those things, and using the tools like splash ball and all the resources that we're building up. Those are great ways, to, again, introduce this water safety and what happens, and getting people in our sport. And so shout out to all. And as you do this, let us know, email the Equity TF US Water Polo. We're going to give you a shout out on social media. We'll make sure that your work is recognized as you do this, because it's so important to us. One more question I want to answer, and I want to give Angela, Scott, and Clark a chance to do that, is so a lot of people are asking what the vision of the education and training will look like at the membership level, right? How does that look for an athlete? How does it look for a coach? What does it look like for a referee? So maybe very briefly just touch on where we think and see that going from our discussions. Angela first, please.
Yeah, so my biggest concern when we started this work was to make sure that it was engaging. and needed to be something that isn't going to be something that you can play in the background while you're doing other things, and that I want people to want to do the training. And so that's what we're focusing on right now in terms of how we're developing that piece. We're starting with the staff level in terms of the education and training, and then we're going to move on to figure out how we can incorporate the staff level training and then use that for the rest of our membership. Yeah.
Scott, you want to jump in, or should I go for it?
Go ahead. I'll jump in after.
Yeah, so one of the things we've talked about, I really liked Angela's, the perspective that she brings. Like, we don't want the trainings to be something that you put on and it's like playing and then you just hit next, right? Like, So one of the things we've talked about, those of you that are coaches, you're familiar with like the Coach's mobile app, right? There's like these 2-minute videos. You can watch them. They're really clear. They're really simple. And this is one of the things we've discussed, like things that are mobile, things that are engaging, and things that are actually like real life scenarios that come up for coaches, athletes, referees, but also for parents. Because one of the things that we experience in our sport is there's such close contact between people in the stands and people on the pool deck. And sometimes people in the stands are saying and doing things which are like really not appropriate. And for you as an athlete, you may be sitting with your team like 10 feet away and you're hearing someone who's a spectator say something that's, kind of troubling, right? So thinking about everything from how to intervene in a moment of like conflict or exclusion, how to build inclusion within your team, how to build inclusion across teams. For referees in particular, how do you engage coaches of different backgrounds, of different genders, of different sexual orientations, things that are like, that people may be making visible, right? So, one of the things I think about as a coach is, as I coached longer and I got to know more referees started treating me differently because they knew who I was, right? And how we actually change the culture, right? Because actually that shouldn't happen, right? Like, so how do we change the culture so that like referees, coaches, players, and parents can really be thinking about their own patterns of behavior? Scott talked about implicit biases that can cover any, sort of range of identities and backgrounds. How we can make those things useful, discreet, engaging, and actionable, right? Because it's not philosophical, right? Like these are not going to be philosophical trainings. They're going to be about ways to directly engage, relate, support, build, and promote our sport. That should be very easy to understand. So those are the things we're working on. I want to say shout out to Drake Water Polo, Gina. Keep it up.
And maybe I'll just kind of follow up, just logistically speaking a little bit more so. Absolutely, we want to make sure that this training is very invigorating and something that people want to learn from and grow from. Logistically speaking, we want to make sure that there's some kind of a baseline education for all participants. And that's something that we've been able to I think we've done a great job of coming together and coming up with a program. Clark had kind of a prototype of what we could use as some basic education for all participants. And so that we know that when we do have participants in the sport, that everybody has at least a base knowledge of what's expected. We also want to have some further training and education for those that would like to participate, or for those that might be found to need a little bit more education when it comes to diversity and inclusion. So, we definitely want to make sure that everybody gets some general knowledge. And again, we feel that will help in the development of the individual, the sport itself, but also help to spread to communities. But also, we want to make sure that if there's any incidences where it's evident that somebody maybe needs to learn a little bit more, that we can give them greater knowledge and understanding. And this kind of goes hand in hand with any kind of progressive discipline that might be applied in situations when it's apparent that somebody is not understanding what's expected. So we definitely want to make sure there's opportunities for participants to grow and to learn, to develop and understand why inclusion is important.
Yeah, I think that was really important. And the two, I very much appreciate your work as a subgroup, and the highlights there are that it's actionable case studies that we'll be working on and building, as they talked about with the case studies, and that sort of progressive discipline when we talked about having that restorative justice lens as we look at this, and teachable moments. That's really important to this group. And so really appreciate everybody being here tonight. Please engage with us more, engage with your communities, engage with what you can do at the local level. Start local, start inward as we discussed, but also and start with your local communities and how we can help out. It is past Coach Mercado's bedtime on the East Coast right now. So in terms of our ability to keep going here, it is we are going to call it out. Thank you again for your time, your efforts, and please help us continue to grow the sport in a new and more inclusive space. And we're very grateful for this opportunity tonight. So thank you, be safe, and happy holidays.